Hello and welcome to Philosophy Insights. Today we are facing a situation in the US that is reminiscent of the Great Depression, with a staggering number of people out of work and more men who have given up on even looking for jobs. This gets amplified by Washington spreading misinformation about the situation. In this video, Dr. Eberstadt will take a deep dive into this topic. He holds the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute.
From the mid-1960s to the present, there's been this eerie but relentless increase in the proportion of prime-age men in the United States who are who have no paid labor. And it's actually reached a level which kind of parallels that of the late Depression.
There's a growing concern among economists and policymakers that too much social welfare is discouraging prime-age men from seeking employment. In recent years, there has been a trend of men in their prime working years dropping out of the labor force altogether, which can be in part attributed to the availability of government incentives and social benefits. This is because welfare programs such as unemployment benefits and food stamps provide a disincentive for men to work, as they can receive financial support without having to actively seek employment.
Today, with higher income levels than we've ever had before, with more education than we've ever had before, with more prosperity than we've ever had before, we have had a 20th century in which the average level of unworking men in our country is higher than it was at the tail end of the Great Depression. So when I say that this is a depression scale problem that we're confronted with right now, I'm not being hyperbolic, and I always try to keep my sources at the bottom of these slides so that you won't think that this is Nick's fake news. So when the feds developed the framework for employment statistics and unemployment statistics back shortly before Pearl Harbor, the system itself wasn't actually unveiled until after World War II. I don't think it really could have been on anyone's mind that if a man didn't have a job, he wouldn't be looking for one. There was the Depression mentality. But what we have seen steadily in the post-war era has been a flight from work by prime-age men, labor force dropouts, men who don't have a job and are looking for work are called unemployed. Men who are neither working nor looking for work, or I suppose they're called many things, but one of the things that they're called technically by our statisticians is not in labor force. And if you look at those lines, this is just the head count of guys who were unemployed versus guys who were neither working nor looking for work. That gray line is the latter. And you'll see that those two lines haven't touched for 30 years. They didn't touch during the Great Recession. They didn't touch during the worst month of the pandemic. And today, well, let's say 2022, close enough to today, for every prime-age man who is unemployed, there are over four guys who are neither working nor looking for work. Now this curious paradox helps to explain why you can hear happy talk from the Fed or from Washington or from Wall Street about how we are at or very near full employment at the same time that we have Depression-era work rates for guys. If you are measuring economic well-being or economic policy by the unemployment rate, you can see here, you are missing 4/5 of the problem, right?
Here one wonders, could this not also be attributed to the frequently heard notion of a reduction in demand for low-skilled labor and a decline in manufacturing jobs? Here's Eberstadt.
In economic circles, as you know, and in policy circles, as you know, there is a received storyline. I hate the word narrative, but the storyline that one hears about this gradual flight from work by prime-age men is really a tale of economic and structural transformation. And the sorts of the keywords that you'll hear are declining demand for less skilled labor, decline in manufacturing, globalization, China enters WTO, offshoring, and so on, and so on, and so on. And there is truth there. The problem, I think, is that it's not the whole truth, and I don't think it's really even most of the story. And I'll show you what I mean from this graph here. Taking into account the fact that we're talking about human beings, I would call this a social science straight line. Okay, you know, it's people are a little bit unruly, so it's not like the orbit of the planets or the geological changes in the Earth, but that's a pretty straight line upward. And if we were to think that the main factor influencing this collapse of work for prime-age men was demand-driven economic and structural change, we would have expected that there would be big bounces when we had business cycles here, right? Show me the bounce. I can't see it. Maybe my glasses are bad. We'd have expected that around 2001, when China entered the World Trade Organization, that we'd seen a shock. I don't see the shock. You know, technological disruption. I mean, we've all got these horrible little devices. Any sign of it? No, I don't think so. And that's a great challenge, I think, to the received wisdom about what has been underway for the last now more than 2 generations. My parents told me that I should not talk econometrics in mixed company or polite society. And so I will not. But I promise you that this chart here shows that there is no correspondence between tighter or looser labor markets and people moving out of this pool of unworking prime-age men and women. At least that has been true since the turn of the century at the very least. There's a lot of movement between, if you're unemployed, you get back into the labor market pretty quick usually. If you are a labor force dropout and you're between 25 and 54, especially if you're a guy, you tend to be a long-termer. And why that would be the case is a very important question for our nation today. Something funny happened during the COVID catastrophe. We as a country came to experience a labor shortage that was a peacetime labor shortage. We haven't had a peacetime labor shortage in this country before. And it's an unusual thing, I believe, to find in any affluent society. But you can see it here. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates of job openings in the United States. And may not be perfectly accurate, but I think that anybody who goes anywhere in the United States at this moment knows that employers are practically begging for job applicants, despite the fact that job applicants have more bargaining power now than at any time in living memory. Part of this, I think, can be explained here. When we look at the pre-COVID trend in manpower, in workforce, men and women who are either working or looking for work, and continue that trend and compare it to actual labor force manpower in the United States in the COVID period and shortly thereafter. We are almost 4 million men and women shy of where we would have expected to be if we were still on pre-COVID trends. Well, part of the answer is that there is a new face to the flight from work in modern America. It's no longer just the prime-age men and to some degree the prime-age women. Before the pandemic, really the only ray of sunshine in the U.S. labor tableau was what was going on with older men and women with the 55 plus. They were the only group from the mid-1990s to the eve of the pandemic whose work rates and whose workforce participation rates were increasing. This is kind of like, like QVC channel. This is kind of like, help, I've fallen down and I can't get up. There's, where are we? The vaccine rollouts occurred about there. And yet, despite the vaccine rollouts, despite everything else, the labor force participation of older men and women in the United States hasn't recovered. And this is something that has to be addressed and explained. And I think that the answer to this part of the puzzle has to do largely with the COVID pandemic, but with the part of the COVID pandemic which has to do with anti-COVID policies, with the unintended consequences of COVID rescue policies. And I'm going to try to show you what I mean by that here. The U.S. government tried, and I guess we'd have to say arguably succeeded, absent evidence to the contrary, in preventing a second Great Depression or a collapse of the world economy or a U.S. economic shutdown with the lockdowns, when the lockdowns occurred in early 2020. And both monetary and fiscal policy went into a sort of an overdrive which we had never seen before. You all deal a lot with monetary economics, and I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't see in this chart or you aren't experiencing in the grocery store already. But that's a big monetary shock. We had a number of problems before that. We were living in an era of free-fed money for a very long time before this. But this is a big shock, and this has had, I think, enduring reverberations and will continue to for some perhaps very long period of time.
Thank you for watching this video, and if you like the content, subscribe to Philosophy Insights.